I have a story that has been waiting many long years to be told. It is not a happy story. It's not a story about fairies or unicorns. It's not a story you would ever tell your children if you wished for them to sleep peacefully at night. It is a story that I must tell. Dark like obsession and vanity, and those who would succumb to these evils. It is a dark story about madness, a dark story about things better left alone and in the shadows. And finally, it is a story about my involvement in all of these things. My dilemma is, how do I make you, the reader, actually feel the reality of the story so you're left with no doubt about its authenticity? A story that took place so many years ago. How can I make you feel it? No, believe it as strongly as if it were about you. I guess all I can do is try my best and hope it gets through. There's a good possibility that over these many years I may have forgotten some of the minor details, but let me tell you this. Everything I do remember is fact. Pure, simple fact, and nothing but fact. I'm not stupid or diseased of the mind, and I know I'm not getting any younger. It's obvious to me that I've reached my golden years when I see men who have not yet reached my advanced age needing diapers as part of their daily wardrobe. I don't mind telling you that I would gladly trade places with any one of them if I could forever forget the memories that have haunted me most of my adult life. Until now, I've never told another living soul about these events that had transpired all those years ago. You may think I have noble reasons for keeping this secret all these years, but no. My reasons are anything but noble. You may even think the events detailed in these pages are only the mad ravings of a senile old man, but let me assure you that even at my advanced age, I have never been more lucid. You see, I know this to be true because that is my curse. My curse is the inability to forget the memories that haunt me every day and every night. My curse is to remember these horrible events with perfect clarity. For years and years, these memories have eaten into my soul like an acid, destroying it slowly until there's nothing salvageable left. If you haven't guessed already, what's kept me from speaking about it all these years has been plain, simple fear. Why then, you may ask, am I telling this story now if I'm so fearful? I'll tell you. I have lived my life, and it has been a great many years, as I've said. Much more than most, in fact. And now, I feel, it is the time for me to confess my role in those horrible sins committed all those years ago. You see, I no longer live in fear of the Grim Reaper. In fact, if I were to see him coming up the walk for me, I'd smile politely, wave, and probably invite him in for a drink, or at least a cup of coffee if the day were still young. You see, I'm tired of all of these horrible memories I've been unable to shake. My only hope is that maybe somehow, by confessing to all here in these pages, I can perhaps be forgiven for all the atrocities of which I played a major role. I suppose it's time I got on with my story, and it seems to me there's no place better to begin than at the beginning. When I was a young boy, still in grammar school, I knew even then that I possessed the drive to become successful. You see, I grew up poor with a father who didn't have a problem drinking up the grocery money, and on occasion, the rent money too. My mother and I learned early in life not to cross him unless we were eager to spend the next few days nursing bruises. It was torture for me, not just a frequent abuse and neglect, but I was only a boy and had to wait for my successes until I grew up. Then I would finally be able to leave them both far behind. To become successful, I knew I had to study hard and make good grades. This was something my father never cared much about. Where his next drink came from seemed to be what he cared about. I guess because he never received good grades in school and dropped out at an early age, he would be considered by most ignorant, which might explain why he thought that being able to hold your liquor was the yardstick by which real men were measured. If you could drink more alcohol than the next guy, that was something really to be proud of. Even better if you could beat him nearly to death as well. So as you can see, I didn't inherit my drive from my father. And my mother was a quiet mouse of a woman. She had never once in her life stood up for anything she ever believed in. That is, if she ever believed in anything. She cowered wherever she went like some horribly twisted and beaten hunchback. since before my earliest memory she cowered in this way every day of her long, sad life. Now you might see why the two of them together sickened me, and I had to do whatever was necessary to get out of there and leave that dead-end life far, far behind. Since it was clear my parents had never bothered to worry about saving anything for my college education, or anything else for that matter, I knew I had to study hard and make good grades so I could earn myself a scholarship to a reputable college. Otherwise, I could be trapped forever in their world, and that's what motivated me. Sometimes, though, the good grades were not always enough. I needed to stand out above my peers, to stand tall, to shine and obscure all others with my brighter light. And to do this, I would gladly throw any one of them under the proverbial bus, if I thought it only for a moment it might help my cause. As you may have guessed already, I didn't make many friends during this time in my life. But hey, I was going places, and when I got there, maybe then I'd worry about friends. At that time of my life, I was as cold as ice. I lived with no real compassion for anyone. And you can just forget about me ever suffering from any guilt or sleepless nights over some of the underhanded tactics I had used against others. As the saying goes, all's fair in love and war, and as far as I was concerned, this was definitely a war of survival. I was not going to end up like my worthless parents if there was anything I could do about it. As my grammar school years led to my high school years, I hadn't changed much. I still had the same old drive to be the best student possible at any cost. Then finally, shortly before the end of my senior year, my hard work had finally paid off. I was awarded a full-ride scholarship to a very prestigious Ivy League college that I'd prefer not to mention here. I finished the last few months of high school, graduated first in my class, and was named valedictorian for the graduation ceremony. Because all of my work at the school was finished, I didn't give a rat's ass about some ridiculous speech that nobody really wanted to hear anyway. So I kept it short. Real short. It was something like, I hope to never see any of you assholes ever again. Then I waved and turned and marched off stage to a surprisingly tremendous ovation. I never looked back. I was quickly moving on to bigger and better things. Once at college, I made good grades, and as usual, I didn't think twice about stepping over someone if I thought it would benefit me even in the least. Time passed like this for a while as I studied business and all the related courses, and I did very well in college, but despite my best efforts, I was heartbroken when I learned I wouldn't graduate first in my class, but an unacceptable and unbelievable third. I couldn't for the life of me figure out how this could possibly have happened. I was devastated and dwelt on it for months afterwards in a deep, dark depression, all the while fearing that this failure could only hurt my chances at obtaining anything close to a decent job offer, even though, in reality, I was receiving letters of recruitment from various companies nearly every day. Then one day, still half blind with depression, as I shuffled listlessly through these offers, among them I found one from a company with a name I recognized from the financial news just minutes ago. The letter was from a large company, and the financial reporter said they have a solid reputation, and that the founder had recently retired and had handed over the company reins to his young and reputedly very beautiful daughter, Angelica. And if the photo they showed even slightly resembled this woman, then I agreed with their assessment. The reporter also said she was not yet even 25, but all of the information he could find on her said she was running that company with the confidence and skill of someone many years her senior. Her shareholders are ecstatic, and then laughing a bit, added that her old dad is now very proud of his little girl, and is repeatedly heard gloating unabashedly to anyone he could find who will listen. Everything the reporter could find on this company showed it to be very profitable, and would most likely stay profitable for the foreseeable future. So I dragged myself from my depression and set up an interview, which, as it turned out, was with the very young and beautiful new CEO, Miss Angelica herself. I was quite proud of the great impression I'd made, because before we'd even finished the interview, she had let it slip I had the job if I was cool with the pay and the benefits they were offering, which I felt was quite fair from what research I'd done on this career. And she seemed, other than very young and even more beautiful, quite level-headed, and more than just a puppet for the company. This little beauty was actually a very smart woman, which I respected immensely. So I took the job right there and started work the following Monday. Not long after I'd begun working there, I started to keep tabs on Miss Woodson whenever I could. I had learned she worked harder than probably anyone else on her considerable staff. She would show up before dawn on most days, and if she left at all, it was usually well after midnight. She was at least as smart as she was beautiful, and seemed to have a special quality rare among bosses that made her employees eager to please her, so they never thought twice about always giving her nothing but 100%. Always looking for a way to move another rung up the old ladder of success, I began to emulate her work ethic. I would make sure I was hard at work in the office when she arrived, and hope she'd begin to notice me. After a while, I began to engage her when I could with small talk at the coffee machine, for she once told me to call her Angelica, not Miss Woodson, and I took this as a very good sign. She was getting comfortable with me and used to seeing me around. I didn't want my motives to be too obvious, so I did these things slowly and gradually, and I never brown-nosed her. After several months of this, I learned my patience had finally paid off when Angelica's #1 assistant, Jolene, would be going on maternity leave soon, and so would need to train a temporary replacement before she left. Angelica came to me and said she was very impressed with my dedication to the company, and if I was interested in the job, it was mine. So, of course, I accepted the job, and the next morning, dressed in my best, I reported to the big office on the 40th floor for my first day's training as Angelica's #1 assistant. I learned the job quickly and took my responsibilities very seriously. Once Jolene was safely gone on leave, however, I began making improvements in my daily tasks from how she had trained me whenever I found I could make it more efficient. I was doing such an outstanding job, what with my increased productivity and all, Angelica decided to make me her permanent assistant. When Jolene came back from her leave, she was quite unhappy to be shuffled off to another less prestigious department. I heard she ended up quitting not long after, which didn't bother me much. After all, she did have a new baby to raise. I loved having the one-on-one contact with Angelica. As her assistant, doors otherwise closed were magically opened for me, where I was allowed to roam freely, and there were also many fringe benefits that came with this job. On one occasion, I was privy to insider stock tips, of which I took full advantage. All the proceeds I added happily to my already highly inflated salary. Angelica was very good at running the business. However, she had one fatal flaw which had recently started to become noticeable, and its ugly name was vanity. She'd always been aware of her extremely good looks in a very big way. In fact, when she took over her father's big office and redecorated, people close to her were surprised to hear she had requested the decorators install an absurd amount of mirrors, and it was no secret this was so she could always catch glimpses of herself from nearly anywhere in the large office. When I first became her assistant, it seemed harmless enough to me. After all, she was a very beautiful woman, but as the years began to roll past, I began to notice she was buying a lot of creams and lotions, all of which claimed to magically reduce or remove the signs of aging. I just didn't get it. I mean, here was this beautiful woman, hardly over 30 years old, practically in a state of panic over losing her good looks to old age. I did what little I could to try and change her self-image to a more positive one. I would frequently make subtle comments about how great she looks, but along with her obsession with aging, she also began to turn a little bitter. I remember once after I'd given her one of my padded, subtle compliments, she turned to me and said I'd better stop those ass-kissing bullshit lies because we both knew it wasn't true, and it was really starting to piss her off. It seemed she was mad at a world where one's beauty could fade so easily, and there seemed to be nothing at all she could do to stop it. As more years passed, Angelica began spending more and more time searching for a way to stop, or at least slow down what she considered the ravages of time. She was gone frequently in search of plastic surgeons who would help her, but she didn't have much luck there, because most of them said she was already beautiful and any surgery would be a useless risk. Of course, she interpreted this as meaning she was so far gone there was nothing they could do to help her. She was now spending less and less time caring for her company, and a decline in annual profits showed this clearly. As the profits began to dip, I was becoming quite concerned, not so much for her as I was about my own future. When her fixation with age started, I thought it was nothing more serious than her own brand of the midlife crisis. because she was in reality still fairly young and still very beautiful, I figured the obsession would run its course and she'd finally be her old self once again. I couldn't have been more wrong. Things were really starting to look bad, not only for the company, but for me as well. If the company folded, I'd be out of a job, and it could be years at another company before I'd be able to earn anything like I was earning at the time. I was afraid of the way things were going. Angelica, it seemed, was going to run her company right into the ground in a very short time. I knew something had to be done, but for the life of me, I couldn't figure out what. Then one day, on my way home from a particularly bad day at work, I stopped at a neighborhood bar, which in itself was strange because I rarely drank and went to bars even less. When I thought about it later, it seemed more like fate guiding me than any random coincidence. While I sat at the bar drinking my second wild turkey one-on-one on the rocks, I heard a woman laugh quite loudly. Something about that musical laugh seemed vaguely familiar, so I turned on my stool to find the source, and there she was, sitting at a small table alone for the moment, watching two men playing a game of pool nearby. I couldn't help but notice she was the spitting image of a girl I had gone to high school with. At least, that was my first impression. I found my eyes kept wandering back to watch her, to compare her looks with the one from my high school memories. As I watched her, I somehow became certain it was actually that girl. It was her, and she hadn't changed a day since high school. Now, I need to make this clear. This girl and I were never friends. In fact, I don't think we had ever even exchanged a single word during our entire high school careers, but right now I had to find out how she had held on to her youth for all these years. If I could find out her secret, I might be able to pass it on to Angelica. And with her youth restored, she would begin concentrating on the company again, and I could feel secure once more. I had decided you can't win without playing, so with my drink in my hand, I got up from my bar stool and made my way over to her table. As I approached, she turned to look at me, and for a second I was sure I saw a glimmer of recognition on her face. "Hello," I said. "I couldn't help but notice you from across the bar. I hope you don't take what I say next as some kind of lame pickup line or anything, but didn't we go to high school together?" Her eyes got real big as she looked at me for a moment, then over my shoulder at the men playing pool. They would be no help. They were really into their game and oblivious to us. Or maybe she was just making sure they wouldn't overhear us. Then she was looking me in the eye once again. Right then I would have bet my life she was about to lie and say something like, "You must be mistaking me for someone else," or, "How's that possible? You're years older than me." But a strange, glossy, blank look crept into her eyes, and she said, "Why, I do believe we did. I remember you. You were always the studious one." "Yes, that was me, always with my nose stuck in a book," I replied. I showed her my best smile as I sat down across the small table from her, well aware she hadn't invited me to sit. "Weren't you one of the cheerleaders?" "Head cheerleader, if you remember correctly," she said, that strange look still in her eyes. "What brings you to a dive like this?" she asked, while gesturing with her hands indicating the entire bar. "You look like you're doing well for yourself, if that great suit you're wearing is any indication." "Thank you so much, but to tell you the truth, I'm beginning to think fate has brought me here tonight." She chuckled politely, a very musical sound, then asked, "What do you mean, fate brought you here?" I thought for a moment, then said, "If I could speak to you in private," I nodded towards the two men playing pool, "I'll try and explain it to you." She looked as if she were about to say no, but then that look crept back into her eyes again, and she said, "Sure. Why don't we step outside and go for a little drive while we discuss things?" "That sounds like a plan to me," I said, then polished off my wild turkey and stood up as she did, and when she started for the door, I followed right behind her. Before we got far, one of the pool players hollered to her, "Hey, Wendy, where you off to?" "I'll be back in a few minutes. I just need to talk with this man outside," she hollered back over her shoulder while continuing towards the door. Once outside in the parking lot, she led me to what looked like a brand new cherry red Corvette. "Nice car," I said. "Is it new?" Ignoring my question, she said, "Hop on in. I'm sorry, I seem to have forgotten your name." "It's David Harris, but don't feel bad because I've forgotten your name as well." Like I ever knew it in the first place, I thought. Again came that musical little chuckle of hers I was beginning to think was a very endearing quality. Then she said, "My name is Wendy Sloan. Now get in." Once inside the car, she asked with a sly little smile on her face, "Do you like my little jalopy?" "Jalopy? Yeah, right. I won't be rude and ask you what you paid for this old wreck," I said. She smiled and then started the engine. It purred, as they say, like a kitten. but underneath that purr you could tell there was a real beast just dying to be unchained. As she pulled out of the parking lot, totally out of the blue, she said, "You know, it doesn't work for men." This took me aback for a moment, and then I said, "If you're saying what I think you are, it's okay, because it isn't for me." "So I guess you want it for your wife or your girlfriend, then?" "I'm not married, and I don't have a girlfriend." "Well, for who, then?" "My boss." Her jaw literally fell open, but she covered it well by saying, "Bucking for that big promotion, are you?" "Not exactly," I replied. "It's rather complicated, and I'd just as soon not go into it right now if that's okay." "Sure, no problem. So what exactly is it you want to know?" "To be completely honest, I'd like to know how you stayed so young looking, even after all these years," I said. "But I get the feeling you already knew that." "Yes, you're right. Somehow I did." She then paused for a moment, and I thought I saw a real look of deep regret on her face, but couldn't be sure as it was gone as quickly as it had come. "You really sure you want to know about this? I mean, it's more work than you probably realize to keep the years off." She took her eyes from the road now and looked directly into mine and said, "Unfortunately, that's about all I can really tell you right now." I was getting a little frustrated. What does she mean that's all she can tell me? She hasn't really even told me anything yet. But before I could put these thoughts into words, she said, "You need to talk to this old gypsy woman to get all the details." She pulled a business card from her purse and held it out to me, but froze when she saw the look of disbelief on my face. "Believe me, I know it sounds like some kind of kid's fairy tale, but if your boss is really serious about regaining her youth, she needs to contact the woman on the card." I wasn't really sure if she was actually serious, but I took the card anyway and looked at it. There were yellow stars and greenish moons scattered about in the background. Over that, in deep red ink, the color of dried blood, was written, "Madame Glukowski. Readings by palm, tarot, etc. Please call 503-555-3154 to schedule an appointment." After reading the card, I looked at Wendy and said, "You can't really be serious. A gypsy palm reader somehow help you to stay young?" She seemed to think about it for a moment, then said, "She'll get your boss ready and tell her what needs to be done." She paused once more for a moment and then went on. "Make sure your boss is really serious about this. Make sure she understands that she must follow the old gypsy's instructions to the letter." She highly emphasized this last part. Soon after, we were pulling back into the bar's small parking lot. She expertly zipped the Corvette into an empty space, then shut down the powerful engine, looked directly into my eyes. This time her eyes were clear and direct, with no trace of that glossy shine remaining, and she said, "I hope you don't take this the wrong way, David, but I'd prefer it if I never saw you again." This sort of took me by surprise, but I felt I understood why she said it, or at least I thought I did at the time. So I said a quick thank you and got out of her car and walked over to mine and got in. As I closed the door, I heard the squeal of tires on pavement and looked up in time to see Wendy flying out of the parking lot in her red Corvette. I watched her zigzag through traffic until she was out of sight. And then for a while I sat there, vaguely feeling like I'd just been manipulated somehow. In mere moments that strange feeling faded away, completely forgotten. I then decided to make a phone call. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket and dialed the number written on the business card she had given me. After a few rings, it seemed to go to a voicemail service and said, "The number you have dialed is for Madame Glukowski and is to be used by women only. So won't you please hang up now, Mr. Harris, and please have Angelica call this number as soon as possible. Good night, David." This time it was my jaw that dropped open. I felt a chill clear through to my bones. The message scared me so badly that I nearly dropped my phone several times before I could find the end call button. Once I did, I just sat there in my car for several minutes and considered what had just happened. Finally, I decided there was more to this gypsy woman than just palm readings. I had made up my mind to go through with this. I looked at my cell phone for a second or two, then dialed Angelica's private number. After 3 rings, the phone was answered. "Angelica Woodson speaking." For a moment I panicked. I didn't know what to say, so stupidly I said nothing at all. "Hello, this is Angelica Woodson. Is there anybody there?" Finally I found my voice and said, "Hello, Angelica. This is David. I need to talk with you as soon as possible. Can I meet you somewhere?" "Gosh, David, I'm pretty tied up here right now. Can't you just tell me over the phone?" The thing was, I probably could have told her all of it over the phone, but that voicemail had really freaked me out, so I said, "I think it'd be best if I didn't. But I can tell you one thing. It's about a miracle age treatment I may have discovered." As I knew it would, that got her attention. "What are you talking about, David? Is this some kind of a joke?" "It's no joke, but I'm not comfortable talking about it over the phone. I can tell you why when I see you. So can we meet somewhere?" "I'm at the office right now. Why don't you just come and meet me here?" "Is anybody else around right now?" No, it's as quiet as a church right now. So when can I expect you to arrive? I guess I can be there in about 20 minutes. Okay then, I'll see you when you get here. Goodbye. All right, goodbye. I ended the call, tossed my phone onto the passenger seat, started the car, and headed back to the office. While I drove, I had time to think about what had just happened. About Wendy and that strange glossy look she had gotten in her eyes. About how it seemed almost as if she were being forced to tell me about that old gypsy woman. Then there was that eerie voicemail. How could the old gypsy woman have possibly known I would call? And how did she know our names? Did all that really happen? Was I beginning to crack up? Going off the deep end? Would Angelica think I was crazy when I told her about tonight's events? Would she take that card seriously? Would she take any of it seriously? Was I making a mistake by doing this? Could that gypsy woman really restore Angelica's youthful appearance? Or was this all some sort of elaborate hoax designed to prey on the desperate? The only answer to these and other questions I could come up with was that old saying, only time will tell, which seems somehow appropriate considering the situation's relationship to time. Time and aging went hand in hand, at least for the average person. But if Wendy was right, it wouldn't apply to Angelica before long. This whole thing was really giving me the creeps and a sense of foreboding. I just couldn't shake the feeling I was about to open a door better left closed. When I arrived at the office, I parked in my designated space, checked to be sure I had the business card that Winnie had given me, then got out of my car and walked up to and through the main doors of the building. After checking with the security desk, I made my way over to the bank of elevators and pressed the small round call button. While waiting for the elevator to come, I couldn't help but notice how quiet and creepy the place seemed at this time of night after everyone but the janitors had gone home for the day. It seemed like I'd never noticed it before, and I told myself I had to quit thinking like this. I was only freaking myself out. Then I was startled by the loud bell indicating the elevators had arrived, and I tried to calm myself down for a few moments, then boarded the empty car and pressed the button for the 40th floor, where the offices were located. After only a moment, I felt the familiar moving sensation indicating the car was beginning to rise. Music was playing softly through a small speaker in the ceiling. It was an instrumental remake of some old and forgotten song I'm sure was once a favorite. I believe it was meant to be soothing to people in cramped elevator cars, but in my present state it was anything but. It was somehow creepy and seemed to make the elevator feel even emptier and lonelier. The ride up, that I'd done hundreds of times before, seemed to take much longer that night. I stood and watched as the display counted up the floors, and I could have sworn it seemed to actually pause between them like never before. When at last the display read 40, the little bell rang, and after the brief pause, the door slid open, revealing a darkened hallway. Somewhere off in the distance I could hear the sound of a lone vacuum cleaner running as a janitor was working away. For some reason, the sound struck me as very sinister and depressing. Trying to shake off the woolies that seemed to have grabbed hold of me, I stepped off the elevator, turned right, and headed down the hall towards Angelica's office for our little meeting. When I reached Angelica's door, I walked right in without knocking like I'd done so many times before. Her office was in almost total darkness, but I found her at her desk. The glow of her computer screen lit up her face in a bizarre rainbow of eerie colors. She was no doubt scouring the internet, searching for new age remedies. When she sensed my presence, she looked up from the screen and said, "Hi, David. I hope you're doing well this evening." "I've been better," I answered honestly, and then sat down in one of the two chairs in front of her desk. "You wouldn't believe the night I've had." "Well," she said, "isn't that why you're here? To tell me about it?" "Yes, I guess in a way I am." "Well, why don't you start from the beginning, David, if that'll make it easier for you?" So that's exactly what I did. I told her about stopping at the bar, something I never do, and then about meeting Wendy and how strange she seemed. I told her about Wendy giving me the old woman's business card, and I told her the last thing Wendy had said to me and how she had left the parking lot in a flash. During all of this, Angelica seemed only mildly interested, like she were listening to a story of little consequence. Then when I came to the part about the voicemail and what had happened when I dialed the number on the card, she was something much more interested. It must have seemed to her that this was some kind of proof that the old gypsy might actually be the real deal. "And you brought this business card with you tonight?" she asked, barely concealing her eagerness. "Well, of course I did," I responded. "It's right here in my hip pocket, but when I checked my pocket, it wasn't there." Reading the sudden concern on my face, she said with a trace of fear, "What's the matter, David? You haven't lost it, have you?" "No, of course I haven't lost it. I made sure I had it when I got out of my car. Then I checked my other hip pocket. Not there either." I was beginning to panic right along with Angelica. Then I checked both back pockets of my trousers, and still no card. This can't be happening, I thought to myself. But just when I was about to admit that, yes, I guess somehow I had lost it, I found it in my breast pocket with no memory of how it had gotten there. Aha, here it is, I said, and then I handed her the card. Geez, David, don't scare me like that. It's bad for my aging heart, she said as she took the card and eagerly examined it. Pretty late right now. Do you suppose it'd be better if I waited until tomorrow to call her? If my guess is right, she'll be expecting your call no matter when you make it. Oh, and the voicemail said to call ASAP, remember? This was all the encouragement she needed, so she immediately picked up the phone and dialed the number from the car. While Angelica waited for the other end of the line to answer, I thought she had never looked more beautiful. She had the face of an angel, and the look of innocent anticipation like that of a child on Christmas morning. Hello? Said Angelica to someone on the other end of the phone. Sorry I'm calling so late, but I just couldn't wait to get in touch with you. Then there was a short pause. Oh, good. I'm glad I didn't disturb you. Another short pause, then. Yes, but how did you know my name? Another pause, and then she said, Yes, I can do that. Yes, of course, right away. She looked at me quizzically, shrugged her shoulders, and reached out and put the phone on speaker mode. From the small speaker in the center of the desk, I heard a woman's voice that sounded as ancient as the pyramids. Hello, David, the voice said without a trace of the expected gypsy accent. As you probably already know, this is Madame Bukowski. How are you feeling this evening? Without thinking about it, I said, a bit off balance, if you know what I mean. She laughed heartily at this, as if it were the greatest joke ever told. It sounded much like you'd expect to hear from an old witch, not at all musical like the endearing laugh of Wendy. It made my skin crawl. I've told myself 1,000 times or more if I would have disconnected the call right then, it would have all ended right there. But deep down, I think I knew better. When the old woman had regained her composure, she continued. I like your honesty, David. You don't see that enough these days. As for the small prank I played on you earlier, I'm sorry about that, but it couldn't be avoided. It's all right, I said. No harm, no foul. Yes, no foul, she said soberly, then continued. I had Angelica put me on speakerphone because I understand you're a very faithful assistant to her, so I believe you need to hear what I have to say as well. Does that sound okay to you, David? Yes, I'm fine with that, I said, even though I was fairly certain I was not fine with that at all. How does this woman know so much about us in such a very short time? It was all just a bit too creepy. Great, said the old woman. Now, Angelica, you still with us, dear? Yes, Madame Bukowski, I'm right here. Please, no need to be so formal. Just call me what my friends do. Gracie. Okay, if that's what you'd like, Gracie. Very good, then. Now that we're all friends, let's get down to the nitty-gritty, shall we? Now, Angelica, I'm going to need some commitments from you. I need to know that you'll be completely committed to my, The old gypsy paused for a moment, looking for the right word, then continued. Shall we say treatment? Now, if there's any doubt at all in your mind about this, or if you don't follow through completely with your part of the treatment, all will fail and you may quite possibly end up worse off than when you started. Do you understand all of this, dear? Yes, Gracie, I understand perfectly. I'd just like to say that you should know I've spent many, many hours over the years searching for an opportunity like this, and if it doesn't show that I'm very seriously committed, then I just don't know what would. I can back that up. She's more committed than any woman I've ever met, I said. But I thought, if this gets any more strange, I'll be the one who's committed. That sounds fine, then, said the old gypsy. I really do believe you mean that, and I trust you to follow through. Now comes the next step. But unfortunately, it can't be done over the phone. So we'll have to meet in person so we can begin your treatment. When would be a good time for you both? I think Angelica thought about this for about half a millisecond before saying, How about sometime early tomorrow morning, if that works for you, Gracie? My calendar is clear all morning. What time would you like to meet? Is 9 a.m. too early for you? I thought Angelica showed a great deal of restraint by asking for a time that late in the day. I know how eager she was to get started. Of course not. I love to get an early start on my day. So be at my shop, which is located at 4360 Barnes Road, Southwest, at precisely 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. And just that quick, the old gypsy was gone. So I wrote down the address so there was no chance of forgetting it. Well, said Angelica, I'll have to say that was very interesting. Don't you think so, David? I guess interesting is one way of putting it, I said. Why don't we call it a night for now and meet up here around 8 o'clock tomorrow morning? How's that grab you? Angelica said as she got up from her chair. Sounds fine to me, I said. See you in the morning, then. I left the office and went straight home and tried to get a good night's sleep so I'd be fresh in the morning, but I had little sleep due to the nightmares that plagued me all night. After spending most of the night fighting off the demons that relentlessly invaded my dreams, it was still early in the morning when I finally just gave up trying to sleep. I climbed out of bed, went to the kitchen, started a pot of coffee, and just watched it drip into the pot while in a semi-daze until it was done brewing. I poured myself a cup and a bowl of cold cereal. While still in my robe, I shuffled myself and my meager breakfast into the living room and plopped down in front of the television where I watched the early news programs, ate my tasteless cereal, and drank my cold coffee, and didn't move until about 7 o'clock. At which time I forced myself to get into the shower, after which I didn't have the desire to bother shaving, so I didn't. But at least I did brush my teeth. After my shower, I decided it'd be too much trouble to put on my usual suit and tie, especially without shaving, so I slipped on an old pair of khakis, a pullover golf shirt, and a pair of sneakers. I decided today would be casual meet the freaky old lady day. At 7:30 promptly, I got into my car and drove back to the office to meet up with Angelica. I arrived at about 5 minutes to 8, and she was already there waiting for me. I pulled my car into the empty space next to hers and got out to greet her. "It's nice to see you dressed up for the occasion, David," she said sarcastically. "If you had a night like I had last night, you'd understand," I said, while noticing she was sharply dressed in a crisp business suit and looked like $1,000,000. "There's no time to change now, so I guess we just won't worry about it." "Sorry to disappoint you," I said. "I guess I wasn't thinking too clearly this morning." Changing the subject, she said, "When I got home last night, I went on the web and printed out what I thought would be the best route to Gracie's shop. I figured with traffic it'd take us about 45 minutes to get there." I noticed Angelica was nearly giddy with anticipation, and I hadn't seen her this chipper in a long time. Then she said, "So, David, are you about ready to head on over there?" Ready as I'll ever be," I said. "Whose car are we going to take?" "Well, since I laid out the path, I should probably be the navigator, so we'll take your car and you'll be the pilot on this trip." "All right, then," I said. "Let's get going." We both climbed into my car and started out to meet the old gypsy on Barnes Road, wherever the hell that was. Traffic turned out to be much lighter than we had anticipated, so we arrived at 4360 Barnes Road about 20 minutes early. This gave us some much-needed time to find a place to park, as there were no spaces in sight. We circled the block and found nothing, so we widened our search, but still nothing. Every time we thought we had struck gold, it turned out to be either a loading zone or a no-parking zone. "This isn't getting us anywhere. Why don't we go back to the shop and try checking out again? Maybe by now a space has opened up." Since I had no better ideas, I agreed, then circled back towards the shop. It was now about 5 minutes before 9, and it appeared we might be late after all. As I turned onto the block, I couldn't believe our luck. Directly in front of her shop was an open space. Quickly, before anyone could steal it, I pulled into the spot. After exiting my car, I took a look around at the surrounding neighborhood. It was clear to me that this area hadn't seen its prime for many decades. All the buildings seemed to have been neglected for many years. Most appeared to be vacant or abandoned, the windows boarded up and covered in graffiti. "I sure wouldn't want to get stuck in this neighborhood after dark. Scary enough in broad daylight," I said as we approached Gracie's door. Attached to the door were two signs. The larger of the two was Madame Glukowski's Psychic Readings. Choose your favorite method. I do all types of readings, from palm readings to tea leaves, crystal balls to bones. If I don't know it, it doesn't exist. The smaller sign simply just said, "All readings must be done by appointments only. No exceptions." Unsure as to whether we should knock or just let ourselves in, we chose the former. I raised my fist to knock, but before I could, the door swung open, revealing a short old woman who looked just as you'd expect an old gypsy woman to look. Though her body was bent and twisted in unnatural ways, she gave the impression of a strong woman who would probably handle herself surprisingly well. In her left hand she leaned on an old bent and crooked cane that appeared to have been cut from a tree limb and worn smooth from hundreds of years of use. Her deeply lined head was wrapped tightly in an old but colorful scarf. Dangling from one ear was a single golden hoop earring. Her smile revealed more vacancies than her deteriorating neighborhood. She was dressed in long flowing robes that exploded in purples, oranges, and a multitude of other colors. "You must be Angelica and her assistant David." Without waiting for a confirmation, she said, "Welcome. Please come in, then gestured to the doorway. As I crossed the threshold, I was hit with a strong odor of some exotic incense. But underneath that odor, I detected another more subtle smell. It was a dark smell that brought to mind death and dark images. It really made me uneasy. It seemed that neither Angelica nor the old woman noticed it. In fact, Angelica commented on the unusual incense. "The scent of that incense is completely divine. How can I get my hands on some?" "I'm so glad to hear you enjoy it. But unfortunately, it happens to be very rare and extremely difficult to come by. You see, it's made by a small group of monks living in Tibet. It's a long and involved process to produce it. The process, I'm told, is so complicated it involves supernatural processes, and that, because of this, it can easily fail to produce the desired fragrance, so the whole batch is thrown away, which of course only increases its rarity," said Gracie. "Oh, that's really too bad. I just adore it." Ignoring Angelica's comment, the old woman said, "Let's move on to the main room," gesturing towards a doorway that was covered by an ancient tapestry. "Just step right through that doorway there." Pulling aside the tapestry, Angelica entered first, followed by me, then the old gypsy. My first impression of the room was its size. It was much larger than I would have expected and windowless. Around the entire perimeter of the room were countless shelves, each with several tiers. Every tier was filled with candles of all sizes and colors, all of them currently burning. It appeared they were the only source of light in this room. On the far side of the room there was a single door that appeared to be the only one in the room. Directly in the center of the room was a large, rectangular table that looked old enough to have been used by Jesus for his Last Supper. Around the top edge a shallow groove had been carved into the wood. At first I wondered what purpose this might have served, but then I got it. The realization was like an icicle piercing my heart. It was an old mortician's table, and the groove was actually more like a gutter. It was designed to allow bodily fluids to flow away from the corpse that lay upon it, and into some sort of catch basin set at the foot of the table. It made me wonder how long it had been since it had been used for this purpose. I already had serious misgivings about this whole situation, but that table brought the situation to a whole new level of creepiness. Everything about this place, from the weird smells to the disturbing table, to the unmistakable feelings this room had been the site of some very macabre rituals. Somehow a certain evil had been in this room countless times, rituals performed that were much more sinister than your average palm reading. The longer I remained there in this room, the more uneasy I felt. I watched Angelica closely for any signs she might feel the same way, but either she was hiding it very well or was completely oblivious to all my observations. "This room is where I conduct most of my readings and rituals. You might have noticed it has the perfect oil for successful rituals," said the old gypsy proudly. "It is a fantastic room," Angelica agreed with a sense of awe. "I really love that old table. Tell me, is it an antique?" "It's nice of you to notice. And to answer, it's been in my family for something like 150 years. "Okay, it's time to end the dime tour and get back to the business of why you're here," said Gracie. "Before you get started, Gracie," Angelica began, "I have a question for you." It seemed to me she was lacking her usual self-confidence, but she went on regardless. "Could you tell me what kind of fees are involved for this treatment you are offering?" "My fees are not in what's important right now, Angelica. We can decide what's fair price later. What is important is the next step in your treatment. If you'll both be kind enough to wait here while I go and fetch some things we'll need to complete the treatment, I'll be right back. Can you do that for me?" she said, seeming to eye me suspiciously. "Of course," said Angelica. "We'll be right here waiting patiently until you return." "Good," said the old woman. "I won't be long." She then turned and went to the door at the far end of the room. From beneath her robe she produced a large ring of keys, and after flipping through them for a moment, she selected one, unlocked the door with it, and went through the doorway and into the next room, closing the door securely behind her. After she had gone, I turned to Angelica and pleaded, "Are you sure this is a good idea, Angelica? We can turn around and get the hell out of here right now if you want. What do you say? You want to get out of here?" "What's the matter, David? Don't tell me you're afraid of that little old lady." She studied my face for a moment and then said, with a huge grin on her face, "You are! You're actually afraid of that old woman. What do you think she's going to do? Turn you into a toad or something?" "Yes, Angelica, it would surprise me in the least if she could actually do that. That old woman scares the hell out of me, and I'm not ashamed to admit it. Something is seriously wrong about this whole thing. I can't believe you don't sense it. Come on, let's go. Let's get out of here right now, quickly, before she comes back," I said, pleading with her once more. "You're being silly, David. I've given my word that I'll see this thing through, that I won't quit no matter what. Instead of acting like a frightened schoolgirl, why don't you act like a man and support me in this? You know how much it means to me." "All right, I'll stay, and I'll try and support you, but that doesn't mean I don't still think this is a very bad idea," I said, caving like a poorly built house of cards in a high wind. "Just remember, you ask for whatever she's got in store for you." At this point, the old gypsy woman returned through the doorway. She had traded her cane for an old fruit box, which she set carefully on the ancient table. Then back through the doorway she went, returning moments later with 2 wooden chairs. She set one at the head of the large table and the other at the foot. When this was done, she returned to the door and locked it securely before returning the ring of keys back beneath her robes. Then she went to the fruit box she carried in earlier, and very carefully took out a silver chalice that appeared to be very old. This she carefully placed in front of the chair at the head of the table. I could tell it contained some sort of liquid from the way she handled it. Probably some sort of witch's brew of herbs and eye of newt or something, I thought at the time. She then returned to the box and removed some more items I couldn't identify and carefully placed them at various points around the table. Once the box was empty, she slid it under the table and out of the way. Then she turned to Angelica and said,
"I see David couldn't talk you into leaving. I'm glad you're really serious and committed to this. And as for you, David, that was a good try, but, as they say, not good enough, apparently. I must admit that I had my doubts about you. Angelica, I was afraid you might trust in David enough to actually let him talk you out of this. But you remained strong and stood your ground, and for that I commend you."
At this point I couldn't help myself, and I just blurted out,
"You see, Angelica? How could you not see?"
I had more to say, a lot more, but suddenly it was as if I had forgotten how to speak. Hard as I tried, nothing came out but muffled grunts and squeaks.
"He won't bother us any more for the time being. And now we've got a ritual to perform," said Gracie,
rubbing her hands together.
"Is he going to be all right?"
Angelica asked, concern in her voice.
Gracie replied confidently, "Why, yes, of course, my dear. I wouldn't harm him. You're going to need to rely on him heavily in the near and probably distant future. He'll be back to normal once the ritual is complete. We just don't need him shouting out in the middle of it and possibly ruining it for us." "Oh, good. I'd hate myself if anything happened to him because of me," said Angelica, relieved. "How sweet of you, dear," said Gracie with a hint of sarcasm in her voice. "Now I need you to go and sit at the head of the table, then we can begin."
Angelica did as she was told, and sat there at the head of the table with that old silver chalice and its mysterious constructs directly in front of her. Then suddenly Gracie started speaking in a strange and unfamiliar language as she sat herself at the foot of the table. As for the ritual itself, I'll never tell the details for fear it may be repeated. I'll take that part of my story to the grave. I will, however, tell you how it ended. I feel that part has to be told. The silver chalice did contain liquid, but not some kind of mysterious witch's brew of herbs and things as I had suspected. I was horrified to learn it contained the fresh blood of a recently sacrificed virgin. What horrified me even more was that Angelica drank it down the gypsy woman had told her to, as required by the ritual, but without a moment's hesitation. Soon after, as I watched, I was amazed to see as the years were slowly being erased from Angelica's face. She was transformed in moments to the young woman whom I had shared chit-chat with at the coffee maker back in those early days when I first started working for the company. What few age lines she'd acquired magically disappeared. Even her hair seemed to gain a luster I'd never known it had lost. At this point the ritual was over, and the old woman produced the hand mirror and, smiling proudly, gave it to Angelica. Slowly she raised the mirror in front of her face and gazed at her reflection. Then tears of joy began to run slowly down her cheeks. After several long moments, she finally lowered the mirror and said to Gracie,
"It worked. I can't believe it. It really worked. Oh, Gracie, how can I ever thank you enough?"
Smiling smugly, the old woman said, "I'll send you my bill."
"Oh, of course. I'll gladly pay it, too."
"There's some final things you need to know. You must keep and protect the silver chalice, and fill it with the blood of a sacrificed virgin. Say the incantations I've written down here for you." She handed Angelica a folded slip of paper, and then continued, "You must drink all of the blood in the chalice as you did today. This you must do at midnight during the first moon of every year henceforth. If you fail to do this as I've told you, your beauty will fade within moments as if you've never done this ritual. You won't need my help any longer for this. As long as you follow the directions I've given you, you'll stay young and beautiful forever."
"Okay, Gracie, I understand, and I'll follow your instructions faithfully every year," said
Angelica, and then once again stared at her reflection in the mirror, a look of absolute happiness on her face.
She had finally gotten what she'd been seeking all these years, and because of the depth of her vanity and its hold over her, the price could never be too high. Once the ritual was completed, just like the old woman had said it would, whatever you'd call it she had done to me had worn off, and I was able to speak again. But I was speechless. The deed was done, and there was really nothing I could do to change that. I knew Angelica wanted her youth again more than anything in the world, but I never would have expected her to go as far as to willingly sacrifice young women to achieve it. Well, David, what do you think of the new, or should I say the old me? Asked Angelica, as a childish but somehow slightly evil smile curled the corner of her mouth slightly upward. I think, well, it's amazing. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I never would have believed it, I replied. And then I said to the old woman, are we done here? Are we free to leave now? Yes, David. Go and wait outside in your car. There's still some finer instructions I need to go over with Angelica. Then she'll be right out. Well, okay. I'll see you outside of the car, Angelica. Sure thing, David, she replied absently, her main focus still on the image being reflected back at her in the mirror. I made my way back through that front door of the old woman's shop alone, and then outside to wait for Angelica. What I learned later was, while I was waiting outside for Angelica, the old gypsy woman had quickly taught her a spell she would use on me to gain my compliance to assist her in the yearly rituals, making me not only her assistant at work, but also her unwilling assistant in locating and abducting young virgins for her to sacrifice. Every year in late December I found myself hunting for a virgin, and every year I somehow found one, was able to abduct her, get her to the basement of the old house Angelica had purchased for this very purpose, and all without ever getting caught. Once Angelica had finished the ritual, and the body discarded, I would find myself deeply depressed for weeks over what I had done. But the next year I'd do it all over again. There were many times I thought about leaving Angelica, the company, and all of it behind and simply running away. I'd saved enough money to live modestly for the rest of my life, but somehow I'd always talk myself out of it. Maybe next year, I'd think. Then one year in late December, not long before the search for the next virgin would begin, I was straightening up Angelica's desk on the hunt for some missing paperwork when I discovered a slip of paper with what seemed to be some kind of spell written on it. I was immediately suspicious, so I secretly made a photocopy of it and carefully put it back where I discovered it. Later that night I did some research and found a man named James, who called himself a white witch. He claimed himself to be an expert in spells, and he owned a small shop on the other side of town. So that evening I drove across town to pay him a visit. It was full dark when I arrived at his small shop. The neighborhood reminded me of the one where the old gypsy had her shop, old and run down. There were people loitering about in nearby doorways and on street corners, and they didn't look too friendly, but I wasn't going to let that stop me. I got out of the car and went to the shop's door, gathered my courage for a moment or two, then entered. Inside the shop it was dimly lit, and I saw there were shelves covering every inch of wall space. The shelves were filled to overflowing with jars of various items, none of which I recognized. Behind the counter was a young man of about 30 years old. He reminded me of an old hippie. He wore a tie-dyed t-shirt, had long hair past his shoulders, and a scruffy-looking beard. Are you James, the owner of this establishment? I asked. That I am, he replied, in an upbeat sort of tone. What can I do for you? I spoke with you earlier. I'd like you to take a look at this and tell me what you think, I said, handing him my photocopy of the suspected spell. Sure, I remember you. Let's have a look-see, shall we? He took the slip up and studied it for a few moments. His face became very serious, and he asked, Where did you get this? That's not really important right now, I said. I just need to know if it's a spell, as I suspect, and if so, what's the spell actually do? Well, said James, it's kind of like a binding spell. You see, when the spell is cast upon someone, it binds that person to obey the commands of the person doing the casting, regardless of their own feelings or morals. It's a very dangerous and very powerful spell, if I do say so myself. It's nothing you should be playing with. That explains everything, I said under my breath. Don't tell me you think someone has been using the spell on you, James asked, incredulous. Yes, it seems so, I said, as the beginnings of a plan started to form in my mind. Is there a way I can protect myself from this spell? Why, yes, there is, but it could be very dangerous for you if the person casting the spell suspects anything. You let me worry about that. Just tell me how I can protect myself, please. So James spent the next half an hour or so telling me of the various ways I could protect myself from spells like this. The best way, he said, For an inexperienced person like myself to be protected was to wear an ancient amulet, one of which he gladly sold to me at what I felt to be a fair price. That is, if it worked as he said it would. The amulet is the easiest way to protect yourself, just to be sure that no one sees it, or you could be in danger. Once it's known you're wearing it, there are ways around it. That is its only flaw, he cautioned me. When we had concluded our business, I thanked him for his time and his advice and went on my way home, all the while the details of the plan becoming clearer in my mind. The next day I went to work as I usually did, the amulet safely hidden under my shirt and tie. I went about my daily routine so as not to raise Angelica's suspicions. Near the end of the day she came to me and said, "David, it's that time of year again. You need to find a girl." I thought to myself that I had gone not a moment too soon to see James. She must have already cast a spell, and it seemed the amulet must have worked. The spell I felt sure she had just cast had no effect on me. I could have told her right then to go and get her own damn version, but it would have spoiled my plan. So remembering previous years and how I'd responded to this request, I tried to duplicate it as best I could. "Yes, it is getting to be that time once again, isn't it?" "Yes, David. I'd like to have a girl ready by New Year's Eve if that's at all possible. We don't want to get caught with our pants down now, do we?" "No, we don't. That just wouldn't do." But I thought to myself, the hunt should prove to be much easier this year. "Good then, and good luck with your hunting," she said. "I'm going home now. I'll see you tomorrow morning, bright and early." "Okay, have a nice evening, Angelica." Later that evening, I cruised an area known for prostitution, and hunted for the youngest girl I could find. In my expensive car, I didn't have a problem finding willing women. Every time I stopped at a light, one or more would run up to my window and ask me if I wanted a date. But I wasn't getting anywhere this way. None could ever pass for a virgin. So I tried a new tack. When the girls came to my window, I'd say I liked them young. Did they know of any young-looking girls out tonight? I got some funny looks. Some even cussed me out for my taste in women. But eventually I found a girl who helped me out. For a $20 bill, she told me where this young girl usually hung out, and that she probably was just my style. So I went to the corner where the woman had told me, but there was no one there. I circled the blocks a few times, killing time. Then as I was about to give up for the night, thinking I'd been taken by that whore for a 20, I rounded the corner and saw a young-looking girl just getting out of another car. When the car drove away, I swooped in, and before I knew it, she was in my car. "I'm not cheap," she said as I pulled away from the curb, "so I hope you've got enough money with you." "Well, how much is enough?" I asked. She seemed to think about this for a moment as she looked around, taking in my luxury sedan, then said, $100 for straight sex. Anything weird will be extra." "That sounds very reasonable to me," I said, even though I had no intention of paying her anything. "Where do we do all this?" "I know a little spot not far from here," she said, then directed me to a dark alley. As I entered the darkened alley, to me it seemed it was perfect, secluded and dark. Once we parked, I slipped a hypodermic needle preloaded with a powerful sedative from my coat pocket and quickly stuck it into her thigh before she was ever aware of it. She tried to fight back, but was completely ineffective. The drug I'd injected was just too powerful for her to overcome, and within moments she was unconscious. Then I went straight to the old house, just like I'd done with all those unfortunate virgins so many times before. I parked my sedan in the long drive located at the rear of the dwelling. Once I was close to the house, I felt confident of all the grossly overgrown landscaping that came up along both sides of the drive, met overhead in the middle, and effectively hid us from being seen by any curious prying eyes. I got out of my car, went to the passenger side to open the door, and lifted her limp body out. And then I carried her to the external basement door. I set her down there. Then I unlocked the huge padlock and lifted the old cellar double doors up and open. I turned then, picked up my cash, and took her into that dark, damp, spider-infested cellar. Upon entering, I reached up and pulled the chain above me, turning on a weak single light bulb that hung by its power cord from the ceiling in the center of the dank room. It now swung slowly back and forth, casting harsh shadows into every corner and creating perfect places for the monsters of your imagination to hide, as it patiently waiting for the right moment to attack. I had years before submitted a set of shackles in one corner, and now I placed one security around each of her ankles, making any idea of her escape all but impossible. Here she would remain, waiting for Angelica's little ritual. Every night until then, I would bring her food and water. We needed her healthy and alive for the big night. A few days later, when the time came, up in the sky, lighting up the nightscape, was a fat full moon. First its light growing dim, then suddenly bright again, then dim once more as it danced among the few wispy clouds floating by on the light midnight breezes. Below this moon I escorted Angelica to the basement doors of the old house after parking under the cover of the overgrown drive. She was hyped up as usual for what was to come. After entering the dimly lit cellar and turning on the single dim bulb, she looked closely at the girl currently chained to the wall and said, "My, isn't she just so young and beautiful? Wherever did you find her?" "Oh, you know, around," I said, purposely being vague. "Oh, well, no matter. It's getting later fast, so let's get this party started." Then she pulled from her purse a hypodermic needle filled with the usual powerful sedative, then slowly approached the young prostitute. We had learned quickly to sedate the girls before going further, otherwise it could get very messy. The young prostitute screamed and hollered and tried to get away from that needle, but by now Angelica had this part down to an art and in no time injected the girl. We waited for a few moments as if the sedative took effect. Once it had, we unchained the girl and carried her to the other side of the room, and laid her on a table very similar to the one the old gypsy had used all those years ago, gutter and all. Only Angelica was much newer than that old gypsy's. Angelica set up all the artifacts used for this ritual, and then went to the young girl's side and said some words in that language I still can't place. Then, when the moment was right, she expertly set the girl's throat in such a way the blood flowed smoothly instead of spraying everywhere. We waited while gravity pushed the flow of blood through the gutter system and finally into the waiting inch of her chalice at the end of the table. Once the cup was full, Angelica reached out and turned a small valve, stopping the flow of blood. And then she carefully picked up the chalice and, holding it above her head, she said some more in that unknown language. Then, with a flourish, drank the entire contents of the goblet down in one gulp. I couldn't believe it, how easy it had been to fool her. My plan had worked perfectly. Now I just waited for the results. But nothing seemed to be happening. Shouldn't something be happening? I felt despair begin to envelop me. My plan didn't seem to be working. Was she aware of my plan somehow? And if so, how did she thwart it? But as panic began to take hold of me, I began to notice that age lines slowly start to appear on Angelica's face. Slowly they grew deeper and more pronounced. And then more lines began to appear, while her hair became more and more gray and frizzly. I watched in amazement as her bosom suddenly deflated, then dropped several inches. Then I saw her back as it began to curve and hunch over, matching the twisted back of the old gypsy. Angelica wasn't just going back to her actual age, but somewhere far beyond. She was becoming a very old woman right before my eyes. It took her a moment or two to realize what was happening. When she did, she turned to me, death in her eyes, and cried, "What did you do to me?" "Nothing you didn't deserve," I said. "Using me by casting those spells on me, forcing me to assist you with all those horrible crimes. How could you? All for nothing more than simple vanity. Once I uncovered what had been happening to me, I had to make it so you could never kill another innocent virgin ever again. It's been done now, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." Her eyes filled with murder and hate as she screamed out, "I'll kill you!" Then she ran at me and tried to rake her fingernails savagely across my face, but she was much too weak to be effective. I then shoved her weak body down to the floor quite easily and said loudly, "I hereby officially submit to you my permanent resignation from your employment." Then I turned and walked out, leaving Angelica crying weakly to herself on the dirty floor of that musty cellar located in the belly of that run-down old house, and I never looked back. Now the rest is what I later learned from a private detective I hired to keep tabs on her, because even though I truly believed with all my being that she would never likely see that old gypsy woman ever again, but I must be vigilant and know if this nightmare were to actually happen again so I could stop her. But thankfully this never happened. I was told that at first Angelica tried to find the old gypsy, hoping to somehow reverse what I had done, but the old woman was nowhere to be found. Her shop was deserted as if she had never been there. So being unable to reverse the spell and seeing no other alternative, she had tried her hand several different times at various suicide attempts, but it seemed there was something about the old gypsy's ritual that had somehow prevented her from completing a successful suicide. And to make matters worse for Angelica, I was told that every night, after the light has been chased away by the coming of night, as the same old moon rose slowly into the dark evening sky, she is haunted by all her slaughtered victims. Every night she is forced to hear their ghostly wailing and cries from the young lives that were all cut short due to that unchecked vanity, and all this without any of the beauty she had coveted for so long. I never went back to the company again after that night. I just quietly left and moved to this small town in the neighboring state where I have lived alone all these many years, in this modest 2-bedroom house. I had once wanted to be successful at any cost, and Angelica wanted her youth also at any cost, but we both learned that what we want can sometimes skew our minds and turn us into monsters. I've never felt good about my part in killing that prostitute, not to mention all those virgins. But I figured one more life sacrificed now to end it all, as compared to the many more lives of innocent virgins over the years. I pray every night I go to bed for forgiveness, and every night I am haunted by those deeds she had forced me to do. But now that I've finally revealed all of these dark, long-kept secrets to the world, maybe now I'll finally have that peace I've longed for. At least, I hope I do. The end.